Sessions, Conversations about Teaching and Stuff. I'm Eric Landrum, along with Garth Neufeld, your podcast hosts. As the name implies, we center on conversations about teaching, but we often veer into other interesting topics, which is the end stuff. This is episode number 129, where Garth had the opportunity to interview Louise Chim from the University of Victoria in Victoria, Canada. Before you hear the interview, please allow me to share some listening tips and my favorite moments. This was absolutely delightful. So even though Louise got hoodwinked into a conversation with Garth, not being overly prepared, one of Garth's classic moves, we have to admit, Louise was a real trooper and just came through lovely. They had to do the recollection memory game where they tried to figure out where they met one another. And 1 year as old as I am, we try to give up on that for the most part. And they've identified probably around 2013 or 2014, probably at a Psych 1 conference at Stanford, where Louise did her graduate education. Actually, they talked a little bit about the graduate work that Louise did at the beginning of the podcast with her PhD in affective science, specializing in culture and emotion. And that was a really fascinating conversation in and of itself about happiness and how happiness varies by culture, and even going into the details about the actual emotions that people experience versus the emotions that they expect to experience. And I'm not going to give away any more than that because I think you'll really appreciate that conversation because it's really relevant to what people are feeling today. Louise grew up in a suburb of Vancouver, and this is a classic immigrant story of her entire family. Her parents her parents are from Hong Kong, and they immigrate to the United States because they want a better life for their children. So again, I can appreciate the sacrifice there. Her mom went into teaching. Her dad was a transportation engineer. And they moved to Canada for better educational opportunities for their children. And the older brother, as well as Louise, maximized those opportunities. In addition to taking advantage of the education, Louise plays hockey and is actually very well-rounded and is in the band and is in the choir. But hockey becomes an important part of Louise's life as well as this podcast because not only two Canadians talking together in a podcast, hockey, it's going to be, I'm sorry about that. I shouldn't have done that. Hockey is going to be an important part of this conversation, but hockey is something that leads Louise to go to Harvard University, and she plays hockey on the Harvard's women's team for 2 years. And in fact, becomes quite good, even though she's modest about it, and plays on teams at Harvard that includes Olympians who eventually will play for both U.S. and Canadian Olympian teams. What's really fun to hear about when Louise is describing her educational experiences is that she didn't know then, and I'm not so sure she knows now, what a superstar she is. Not a superstar that she's developing into, but the superstar that she is. So, for example, she just mentions in passing that as an undergraduate, she was working in Mazrin Bijani's undergraduate lab, where they were talking about how do PhD programs work. And so, and maybe she didn't know it then, but Dr. Bijani was and is a world-class psychological scientist. And so what an amazing opportunity. Another theme that comes out of this for me in terms of, in addition to humility that Louise possesses, is also resilience. Louise arrives in the United States and moves to Boston to go to her undergraduate Harvard University experience right before 9/11. So imagine growing up in Canada, coming to the U.S. just before 9/11 and having to be here during that but not growing up here. Just an added level of complexity that took perseverance and resilience. Another thing that impresses me about Louise is that she wasn't in a hurry. In other words, after she graduates from Harvard, she takes the advice of mentors and graduate students in the lab and postdocs and gets a job as a lab manager for a couple of years at the University of British Columbia. She had talked to people about how they were burnt out. She didn't want to become burnt out herself. And so I find this in stark contrast to so many students I talk to today, currently, who want to race through. And I get it, for financial reasons, for age reasons. They're anxious to get into their next job, the next part of their life. But Louise, at whatever age this was, and I didn't go back and calculate it, took the advice of people around her and maybe had the luxury and maybe had the, maybe had the privilege at the time. I didn't really get into that, or I don't think Garth and Louise got into that, but took the time and got a job and moved back to Canada and got the experience that someone told her that would be beneficial to her. And so I was just really impressed by that. Then after that, goes to Stanford for graduate school, which is, again, a top-notch, world-class graduate program, and makes the most of those opportunities. And obviously, Stanford 1 is the place where Garth and Louise meet. And then she's blessed to find a job in Canada at the University of Victoria, which is just a couple hours from where she grew up. The theme, there's so many themes for me listening to this, but I think humility is one that comes out. And they end on a conversation, and I know you'll listen for it, but there was a direct quote at the end in my notes that I wrote down. Just throughout her time, she tried to soak up the advice at the time because I knew nothing. I think that was either the Stanford 1 or VicTop or one of the conferences that she attended. And I think people starting out in their careers, or maybe even as undergraduates or new assistant professors, think about that. Tried to soak up the advice at the time because I knew nothing. Oftentimes, imposter syndrome doesn't lead to that humility. Oftentimes, imposter syndrome leads people to put on airs or act like they know everything, and they are closed off to advice. They are closed off to learning. And so I think this is a real credit to Louise and her family and this perspective that she has on teaching and learning and just her own advancement. And I think you're going to really enjoy this.
This is Garth, and I am here with a good friend and colleague, and we've worked together on things, and we've known each other for a few years, and it's Louise Chim from the University of Victoria in Victoria, Canada. And Louise, thank you for doing this. I'm sorry that my correspondence with you wasn't clearer, that because I kind of just threw Louise into the fire right now. I think you didn't realize that we were maybe going to do this right now.
Nope. Yep. I thought this was maybe a preparation meeting to talk a little bit about psych sessions and what your expectations were for this conversation. So I have come into this with zero preparedness whatsoever, but maybe that's a good thing. We can,
I think it is
spontaneous and off the cuff.
Exactly. And this is one of the great things about psych sessions is it's conversations about teaching, which you know a lot about, and stuff. So we'll get into anything else is fair game. So we'll see what we can do. Louise, I've known you for, I don't know, how has it been, like 5 years or something?
Well, I was reflecting on this, like how long I've known you, Garth. And actually the first time, you probably don't remember, but the first time I remember hearing your name was actually at the 2013 Psych 1 conference. Okay. I think the 2013 when I had just graduated from Stanford, and I was at that conference because it's right there in my own backyard and at Stanford. And I think I remember Bridget saying that you were starting another version, the Tip Northwest version of an intro psych conference at that time. Was that right? Or was it in 2014 that you started?
Okay. So now, see, this is the problem with the pandemic. We missed a year. I think that timeline is very close, if not the correct time. But and you know what? If we did have our first one in 2014, it makes sense that we would have started planning, and I would have already reached out to her in 2013. So yeah.
So either that, or it's possible the second time I met you, I don't know if you remember this. This makes me sound sort of stalkerish, like remembering all these different events that we've encountered.
Well, I remember you as well. So yeah, go ahead.
In 2013, also, there was VicTop, which now no longer exists.
Right.
I think, what does that stand for? Like Vancouver
international conference on teaching of psychology.
Yeah. Yep.
Good.
So I think we had our first few conversations at that conference.
We sure did.
Yep. And I had just graduated from my PhD, like June of 2013. Was very fortunate to apply to one position that was a teaching stream position
at UVic,
at the University of Victoria.
Yeah.
Going into it with like never having taught my own class.
Yeah.
I had co-taught some classes in the summer at Stanford, and I had TA'd a bunch, which involves a lot of teaching too. We really contribute to developing those teaching materials and learning about it, but never having like from start to finish taught my own class.
So did you TA on the Psych 1 course at Stanford then?
I didn't. In hindsight, I really wish I did. It was such a, it is still an amazing program to develop teaching. In graduate school, one nice thing about our program was that everyone had to TA 5 courses, regardless of your funding situation. So it wasn't tied to your funding. And as part of that, you either had to TA for Intro Psych, Psych 1, or you had to TA statistics. And I went the statistics route. Because I really like the Dr. Ewart Thomas was the professor then teaching intro stats, and I really liked him, and I liked his teaching style and philosophy, and I wanted to learn from that. So that's why I went that route. But in hindsight, and now I teach a bunch of intro psych here at UVic. I kind of wish I had that training from Psych 1, from Bridget, from James Gross there. So I don't know, maybe
were those the two? Those were the two who were running Psych 1, the program at the time?
Yeah, at the time. And I think James Gross is still running the program there.
Did you always go to teaching conferences, or did those two that we first met at, because those were the two conferences we first met at, was that you just happened to go to Stanford and you happened to, be soon working in Victoria, or had you?
Yeah, I mean, in graduate school, I always knew that I wanted to teach, whether that was just teaching or research or primarily focused on teaching. And so I did things like, the teaching stuff that you would do locally at your university or institution, right? Your learning and teaching center. Yeah. I did sort of workshops there. But yeah, in 2013, I was like, well, I got this teaching job now. I better add things to my toolkit to learn how to be better at this. So those were my very first 2 teaching conferences.
Wow. Okay. And did you do those workshops and stuff voluntarily, or was that part of your program to do things like that?
Yeah, it's a great question. I know in our program, they would have a psych specific one where all TAs that were teaching for the first time should go to it, sort of like a TA orientation, like a full day thing. And then subsequently, it was more on a voluntary basis. I was the teaching and learning center liaison for our department. And so that was part of the impetus to do that as well. But yeah, it's all on a volunteer basis. It's not something where you get a teaching certificate or anything at the end.
Okay. So what was your area? So you got your PhD in what?
So in psychology, but in the area, I was in the affective science area at Stanford. So specializing particularly in culture and emotion. So looking at how different cultures might value different types of emotional states. And particularly that we have this idea that everyone wants to be happy, but maybe the types of happiness that people want to feel actually differ across cultures, and that might be influenced by our culture, our cultural values, and our environment.
Oh, wow. How much do you remember all that research that when I think back to like graduate school, for me, it's like, I didn't follow it afterwards. So it's like it's kind of a memory strain to go back. Are you pretty, can I ask you questions about it? 'Cause I'm fascinated.
Yeah.
Okay.
No, absolutely. I think it's been a while since I've given like my elevator pitch about my maybe dissertation and area of research and the area of research of my advisor. But I think things take a long time to get published. So even like my dissertation work just only got published maybe in 2017.
Wow.
So I still have a decent grasp of my research area. Yeah.
Okay.
Passed
So
away.
other than what you just told me, are there any kind of were there any big takeaways that you found?
Yeah. So absolutely. So in my graduate program, my advisor, Dr. Jeannie Tsai, she invented this theory called the affect valuation theory. So this idea, again, that culture influences more the emotions that you want to feel, whereas maybe your temperament influences more the emotions that you actually feel. So in her like graduate career and subsequent career, she was constantly looking at like actual emotion and not really seeing as many cultural differences. And then she realized, well, maybe it's more about your goals about emotions or how you want to feel rather than how you actually feel that differ. And so in pursuing that, she found particular East-West differences. So in looking at specifically in the US, European Americans valuing more these high arousal positive states. So like things like excitement or elated enthusiasm, they value those more than Hong Kong Chinese, whereas it was actually the flip that Hong Kong Chinese value more these low arousal positive states like calm and peaceful and serene more than European Americans. So that was sort of that main finding that led me to think about, well, how do these ideal emotions impact how we perceive other people? Right. So you imagine if you're someone who really values excitement and elation and enthusiasm, and you see someone who maybe values more of those calm states or who's maybe acting in a way in more of a calm manner, do you form certain impressions about them that maybe they're too quiet, maybe they're not good enough to be hired for a certain job? You might see them as less friendly. So I was really interested in graduate school in how these differences in ideal affect influence how you perceive other people and also how you respond to things emotionally. So responding, emotional response. So if you're someone who really values calm states and you're put in a situation that you're meant to value excitement, or it's a situation that really needs excitement, are you sort of put off by that?
That's fascinating. Did personality, did like extroversion ever come up in that as well? Yeah, because you talked about kind of internal dispositions too, right?
Yeah, exactly. So part of Dr. Tsai's theory is that temperament, things like extroversion, neuroticism, might influence more your actual affect instead of your ideal affect. And that's what you do find in terms of how do you ideally want to feel. It seems to be more influenced by your cultural values, your environment, whereas how you actually feel is influenced by extroversion, neuroticism, things like that. So it's trying to sort of distinguish between the two. But of course, like you're saying, they're correlated, they're related to each other as well.
Yeah. You know that I do some work out in Thailand. And so that has been like, close to 20 years of kind of picking up on the culture and understanding those differences. I still find it fascinating when psychology and folks like you who are doing this kind of research, when it resonates with something I've experienced, right? Because you can't quite put your finger on what are the differences, but we have very good friends out there, and of course this is from my perspective anecdotal, but maybe not, right? Which is that our friends, they do value calm and peace, but it's very interesting. They like that American side, and I conversely really like that kind of that Thai calm that I experience when I'm with my friends from another country. So that's yeah. So it's interesting.
Yeah, and it's not to say that it's one or the other that we value, right? We can value both a lot, and in fact, in American culture, and I'm from Canada, so I should say also like some of the research in Canadian culture, people value calm states. Not like we don't value those calm states. It's a relative difference. In that too. And then, we're talking about in general across lots of people. So there are individual differences in that as well.
And we'll be right back. Time is a finite resource. And as an instructor and a parent, I get it. There's a lot on our plates. Managing multiple classes, grades, and assignments can take up more time than we'd like. Hawkes Learning can save you time and sanity with introductory psychology software designed with you in mind. With tools like pre-created homework and test templates, as well as automated grading and progress tracking features, Hawkes software supports you so that you can better support students. See for yourself. Get free chapter projects, example videos, and review materials at www.hawkslearning.com/psych sessions. Again, that's www.hawkslearning.com/psych sessions.
Let's because you mentioned it. Tell us where you grew up.
Yeah. So I think that's what, going back to when we first met in 2013, I think that was the other defining feature. You were originally from Saskatchewan. And so we had that connection, like, oh, I'm from Canada, I'm from Vancouver. So I grew up in a suburb of Vancouver called Richmond. I was born actually in Alberta, in Edmonton, Alberta. But we moved to Vancouver when I was like 3. So I don't really have any memories.
That's funny. We made Alberta. the same, like I was born in Winnipeg and then moved west. But then we still ended up in, an area of Canada where the mosquitoes are as big as birds in summer. And then it's like negative 35 degrees in winter. Yeah. So we should have kept pushing west, but we didn't for some reason.
Well, so my parents actually, they're originally both from Hong Kong. And they moved to Canada for the opportunities, particularly in education and getting a university degree and all that, because at the time, I think in Hong Kong, there were very few universities as well. And now there are a lot more. But they moved to Manitoba. That was their first stopping point from Hong Kong.
To Winnipeg?
So in the 70s, to Winnipeg.
Wow.
And so in the 70s, they moved to Winnipeg. And then, like you're saying, they moved out west. So I don't know exactly the date. It might have been in the late 70s. They then moved to Edmonton. And then in the mid 80s, they moved to Vancouver.
Louise, our folks could have brushed shoulders in a supermarket somewhere in Winnipeg in the 1970s. How wild
crazy.
Is that, right?
Yeah. Well, and just a shout out that you are from the best hockey town ever, the Edmonton, Alberta. So
I was going to say, where are you going with this? Because certainly it's not the Vancouver Canucks at all.
No.
The top notch. And everyone now who is listening who is not a hockey fan is just like completely disengaged.
Except I'm gonna grab them back right now. You ready for this? Because you played hockey, Louise.
Yes.
Yeah. How much?
So
when did you play?
Growing up. So in Vancouver, one neat opportunity that came up is I was playing Ringette at the time. Ringette is also an on-ice sport, similar to hockey in a lot of respects, except instead of a puck, it's a circular ring. And instead of a stick with a blade, it's just the stick. I won't go into the minutiae of like the details of what Ringette is, but I think in the early or mid 90s, they started a girls hockey association where I was growing up. And I thought, wow, that's great. Like I'm going to try girls ice hockey. So I started playing maybe when I was 11 or 12, somewhere around there. I played ice hockey throughout high school, middle school. And then I had the opportunity to play hockey in college as well, which is pretty cool. So I played hockey for 2 years at Harvard, this little known place called Harvard, which I don't think I ever expected to go to a prestigious university like that for university college. But I think
talk a little bit about that, like how does, because I know that getting into certain sports, like I hope my kid does sports someday, because I think it's a great way, even if it's not an Ivy League college or something like that, it's a great way to get some help going to college anyway. But how do you go from like playing hockey in a suburb of Vancouver and then, going to, Harvard. So were you at the top of your team? Were you performing really well?
Well, yeah. So I was always a stay-at-home defenseman, so defensewoman.
Yeah.
So not necessarily the flashiest player on the ice, just more, slow and steady wins the race, dependable back there, not going to get caught up on the ice. So, but yeah, I started sort of a general team. And then we had sort of like high performance teams also. And so I got involved in those. My brother also got really involved in coaching girls hockey, which is kind of neat too. He's 7 years older than me. So, that age difference made sense for him to start coaching. He wasn't like a high schooler coaching other high schoolers or anything like that. But yeah, we just got involved in more tournaments and other opportunities. I played at the provincial level. And knowing the opportunities that were available, especially on the East Coast of the US, to play college hockey, there's so many college hockey teams out East, managed to find a place there to play hockey. And I did pretty well in school, and I was very well-rounded as well. I played instruments, heavily involved in like band and choir and things like that as well. So I think that whole package made it maybe a bit more desirable to get into a school like that. Not that we were thinking of that explicitly. I always thought I would go to a local university out in Vancouver, and then this opportunity came up, and yeah.
Well, that's what we do, right? In Canada, most of the people we grew up with, that's what you do. I mean, I went to the University of Saskatchewan in my hometown, right? So that's pretty typical. That whole leaving home for college thing is so much more of an American, normal practice than it is, Canadian, at least for folks like me.
Absolutely. Yeah. And definitely the case here. And in my high school, most people, if they went to university, it was a local university you go to. It made sense. And you could stay at home, live at home while going to university, save some money that way as well. So there isn't this notion, like you said, of moving somewhere else to go to school.
Right.
And getting that college experience.
so your folks, when they came over, were they college educated already? Yeah.
So they both had like teacher certificates in Hong Kong, but then came here to pursue further education here.
And what did they do for education when they arrived? Or like, what did they get? They got further. Yeah. Did they go into different careers or?
Yep. Well, so my mom ended up going into teaching. So she actually still teaches now. But my dad ended up being a sort of a transportation engineer consultant. So city planner style thing of, assessing what are the needs for a city and the roads and what to anticipate if building X, Y, and Z transportation infrastructure. I don't know if I have the terminology right there. That's probably just the gist of what he did.
Sure. So when it came time to go to college, was the idea that you would go to college with your family?
Yeah. I think education was pretty important in our family, and so there was the notion definitely like you're going to go to university, college somewhere. And so that was definitely an expectation. And, my brother being 7 years older than me already went through that, right? Like he was already in university at the time that I was still in elementary school. I think grade 7 or grade 6, he had already started, right? So I already had a bit of that model of like going to university. That said, I think it's really interesting because I think when I went to graduate school, all of a sudden I didn't have that model. Like, what do I do now? Like, what is graduate school? And even in undergrad, thinking about going to graduate school in psychology, I was like, what would that be like? How does that work? And I distinctly remember we had in the lab I was in, Dr. Mazar and Banaji's lab, we had this like weekly meeting for all the undergrads that work in that lab. And it was led by some graduate students there. And I distinctly remember learning at one of those meetings, like, you can apply to go to graduate school, and oftentimes there are stipends for you. So you're not like paying your way into that. So I sort of was astounded, like, someone will pay me to go to graduate school and do research. Like, this is amazing. So that was such an eye opener for me, because that wasn't something I think my family had ever considered or thought about, like how do PhD programs work?
Yeah. You know, in that way, because I'm first generation college, but in that way, even though your folks did some, got a degree and they did some college, that doesn't mean that you've figured it out, right? Or that they've figured out these new systems, this was uncharted territory for you, for sure. So, you said you played 2 years of hockey at Harvard.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So that was it?
Yeah. So I played the first 2 years, and such an amazing experience. We had Olympians on our team, even. So like, that was the level. I'm not at the level of like Olympic hockey player, but I've touched greatness in terms of playing on the same team as some of these people. Just wonderful people in general. But
these were Canadian or Olympic or both or American? Or
for both.
Both. Yeah.
For both.
Nice.
Yeah. So yeah, we had a lot of greatness on our team, and actually in my second year, we made it to the NCAA finals, like the championship game. We lost in double OT, so that was fairly devastating.
I bet.
But yeah, so we were quite good. But it is a lot of commitment to be an athlete. You're training every day for at least 2-3 hours. Road trips every weekend, or home games every weekend. And so I was starting to get into psychology in my sophomore year, and I thought, well, if I want to volunteer in a lab, if I want to, actually put a lot of energy into psychology, I can't. As people do, there were some amazing athletes that did both. And in fact, one of my teammates at Harvard is now a professor in the psychology department at Stanford.
Oh, wow.
So people do both. But for me, I was like, this is probably too much. I'd already sort of felt like being at Harvard and trying to keep up with people there was already a pretty daunting task. I don't feel like I was, I went to a public high school. I don't feel like I was particularly trained into, performing well academically at such at an Ivy League school. So I didn't think I could do both, and so I ended up focusing more on the psychology side of things.
Did you feel out of your element there as a kid from public school and like from day one?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And we'll be right back. At Macmillan Learning Psychology, content matters. That's why our authors make sure each new edition includes the latest research and responds to the changing world around us. Take, for example, the recently published edition of Comer & Comer's #1 bestseller, Abnormal Psychology, which includes significant coverage of the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on mental health. Macmillan Learning Psychology, because content matters more when it's current, engaging, and reflects the world in which we live. Go to macmillanlearning.com/psych sessions for a free content preview of Comer & Comer's COVID-19 and mental health coverage.
Yeah.
Oh, definitely. I mean, I think maybe everyone has this, right? The imposter syndrome, but knowing that, and there are a variety of amazing people at Harvard, but I felt like I was coming from a high school. We didn't have AP courses at our school. We had like one AP course, but it wasn't even like we took the AP exam. It was a weird experience to try to navigate that, and moving to a new country. And actually I had moved to Boston right before 9/11 happened too.
Wow.
So, and when I tell students about this, it dates me, because then they now know, like, when was I a freshman in college?
Totally.
In 9/11. but so that obviously shaped that experience as well, like moving to a new country, feeling like a lot of people maybe had more, were better, well prepared, maybe had more advantages going into university. And I didn't do well in university. I often think back now, like knowing what I know now as a professor, I could just ace university. Right?
Yeah,
I could do very well.
What didn't you have? What skills were you lacking as you look back?
Probably, a lot of the note-taking skills that we try to teach students, as well as study skills. We've, I don't know if you've talked about on this podcast, like Stephen Chu's like how-to videos.
Yeah.
We didn't have, I don't know, YouTube probably didn't exist at that time.
Right, of course.
The false notions of, I'll just read the textbook and highlight some things, and that information will get into my brain to do well on exams. I often tell my students, because I teach intro psych here at UVic and teach something like 900 students every term. I tell students I didn't get an A in intro psych. Like I actually did not do well in intro psych, and I think hopefully that makes other students sort of feel a bit better. Of like, if I don't do well now in psychology, it's not like I can still pursue psychology as a career, as a major, even if I don't do well in intro psych.
Yeah, I have the same story. I did worse than you. I think I was a D in intro psych. So now, how did you end up getting by? Did you figure out those study skills as a matter of survival there, or did you just like? I imagine that the other way to do this, if you don't have the skills, is you just work so hard. Yeah.
I mean, I think I didn't know how to seek help, I think, in my freshman year there, of like, how do I develop these skills? Like, for example, I know at UVic, we have like a first year course that you can take that you learn self-regulation skills, you learn time management skills, you learn how to study. And I think that's such an amazing course to have. It's possible at Harvard they had it, and maybe I just didn't know, but what a neat opportunity to learn. And I think, all throughout my undergraduate degree, I got better marks as we went on, but it could also be in your second and third and fourth year, maybe just the skills are different. I don't think I ever really learned how to study. I don't know how I survived university. I think a couple of things after university, after I graduated, I took some time off to be a lab manager, a research assistant in labs out at UBC, University of British Columbia. And I think those practical skills is actually what helped set me apart when applying for graduate school.
Interesting.
And of course, Harvard has a lot of name recognition. So I'm sure it was advantageous that I graduated from Ivy League school, even though I didn't do particularly well.
Right. Well, okay. So just as we're following the timeline here, did you choose psych as a major during your junior year, or was it before that?
I think it was before then.
Okay.
I didn't think I was going to major in psychology in my freshman year. I think a lot of students, if you performed academically well in high school, it's like, well, I did well in the sciences, maybe I'll go into med school, right? Without any real knowledge of what that would entail or what that would be. And then I took a psychology course in my second semester of my freshman year, and it just really changed my outlook. I think one of the things that really struck me was how much culture wasn't represented in a lot of the major psychology findings, that often we're making these assumptions that these processes work universally, when in actual fact, they've been studied on a very particular specific population. Mm-hmm. So I think that really sort of, started my interest in psychology, and that's sort of when I decided to major in psych.
Okay. And so you'd have this non-traditional path where you finished your undergraduate degree and then you took what did you take, a year off?
2 years off.
You took 2 years off.
Yeah, I think, and that was actually the recommendation of a lot of the graduate students that were in the lab. I think that's so key, is maybe having those connections with potential mentors who have already been through it, right? Like, so these graduate students that you're working with, like, well, how did you get here? What do you recommend? So it was actually through that they made the recommendation, like there's no rush. Gain more experiences that you want to gain. I did a lot of work in stereotyping and prejudice in undergrad. And I knew I was also sort of interested in the cultural aspect as well as well-being and health. So I was able to gain those experiences by taking a couple of years off, and also very fortunate that I managed to find some paid positions in psychology as a research assistant, because I know that's also rare. But I
you keep finding it's so rare, but there must be something about you that you keep finding these opportunities, right?
I mean, I think it's a lot of luck.
Yeah, no, I get that.
Luck and perseverance, right?
For sure.
The combination.
Yeah. But when you string together so many things, it just can't be luck, right? I don't know. Somebody was looking at Harvard, somebody at some point you heard, hey, or you thought there's a lot of hockey programs on the East Coast at these different colleges, or when a graduate school student said to you, hey, you might feel pressure to go straight into a PhD program, but like, if I had to do it all again, I would take a couple of years off and really get these skills and figure out what I want to do, which sets you up eventually for applying. I don't know how many graduate schools did you apply to when it came down to it?
Yeah, that's a good question. Maybe 8 to 10.
Okay.
I think around that range. And I got into 3 or 4, maybe. Because also awesome. Graduate school is really competitive to get into too, right? But I think what you're saying here is, I think a lot along the way, I had a lot of people help me, right? It's not something you do as an individual. It's something you do, your community supports you. So thinking about going into university, playing ice hockey, a lot of that was help from my brother, right? And then in undergrad, in the lab I was working in, the graduate students there giving advice, right? And then reaching out and getting paid positions out at UBC, those professors were also my mentors to help me apply for graduate school. Like knowing, okay, well, what do you do in a personal statement? So it really is like the people who help you along the way it's not, so I guess it's not luck in that sense. Like you have to have that community to support you. Yeah.
But you also weren't, it seems like you weren't anxious to like move really quickly on to the next thing. It's like, are you the type of person who stops and like assesses the options and thinks about the best way forward? I'm more of a, I guess maybe I'm a little more anxious, and I just sometimes go without thinking. So, right. Is that less your personality and more about kind of assessing?
Yeah, I mean, I think in high school and in undergrad, it was just sort of like go, go, go. But I think maybe I was a little burnt out also through undergrad. And I thought, that might be nice to take a couple of years off and not be in school. And I think I did see that. Like when I started graduate school, there were some people who went straight through and there were people who took time off. And, we all ended up being okay. But I think some people who went straight through were also like, yeah, I kind of wish I took a little bit of time off as well and not gone straight through.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about Stanford, because if I recall correctly, Stanford has one of, at least for undergraduate anyway, they're one of the most competitive schools in the United States. I'm assume that their graduate programs are the same way, right?
Yeah. It's at least, I don't know, I haven't checked in many years, but like in terms of rankings, or if you take any weight to those rankings, it's one of the top programs. Yeah.
So when you got into that, what's going through your mind when you get that letter from Stanford that, you've been accepted and now you have to choose between that and a couple other programs? Is Stanford like a no-brainer?
Yeah, I think in graduate school, it's all about the fit between your advisor and what you want to do and what kind of advisor you're looking for as well. And not just necessarily a part of it's the program. And it's funny because I have this conversation a couple of times with some friends that I met during the time that I was a lab manager between undergrad and graduate school. And they remember me saying, oh, I really like Stanford because it seems like they also train you a bit to become a teacher. Like you're required to like TA, 5 times during your program, and that's part of the program. And so they remember me saying that, like, that was one of the deciding factors as well, which is kind of funny now that I'm in currently I'm in a teaching stream position, which means I focus more on the teaching side of things and not as much the research side, although I can do more like research on teaching and learning. So that could have been one of the deciding factors. And the other thing, I think the advisor fit and what she was doing, her research on emotions and ideal affect really struck a chord with me as well. And so I think a few of those things really influenced my decision to go there. And just Northern California is just so beautiful too. It's a nice place to live.
It is. And that campus is unbelievable. And I mean, the people, the legacy of that psychology department it's insane, right?
Yep. No, absolutely. So to be part of that, I feel so lucky to be trained in that program that has a lot of, amazing researchers and teachers there. It's such an amazing experience. And I feel very lucky to have gone there. And I also feel lucky to have been able to then afterwards find a job close to where I grew up. That doesn't always happen either, right, in terms of academia.
I can hear in your voice that you sound, you feel very thankful or grateful or something that the way that this all played out. I mean, what are the chances that you would find a job in Canada,
right,
like a couple hours from where you grew up, right?
Yeah. So I was all set to graduate that year in 2013 at Stanford, and just seeing what my options were at the time. A lot of times now, in order to be competitive in a research stream position, you're doing postdocs, right? After, it's not just enough to have that PhD. So just seeing what my options were, and I noticed. I went to the UVic, University of Victoria Psychology website, and noticed this job posting for a senior instructor. I had no idea what that meant, though. It seemed like a senior instructor meant that you had to have 20 years of experience under your belt or something like that. So I remember emailing the chair of that search to just be like, hey, do I qualify for this? I'm getting my PhD this year. And they said, yeah, that was fine. And so I applied for the senior instructor position, which now is called assistant teaching professor. So I think the name sort of reflects better what the position is. And it's a tenure track teaching stream position.
Does UVic does this imply that UVic really values teachers at their institution and instruction and not just research?
Yeah, I think absolutely. I mean, I think these teaching stream positions are now popping up a lot of places, but I honestly, in 2013, I hadn't heard of this before. I didn't know that this existed.
Do you know where it came from? Like who was in charge
specifically out at UVic?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, when I came in, and again, highlighting this idea of mentors, there was someone here who'd been teaching here for a while, Martin Smith, and he famously is known as the first tenured teaching professor at UVic. Subsequently, now there's a few more, but he was the very first one. And so I don't know historically. I know I think, pushed for a lot of the ability for promotion and other things like that within that teaching stream at the time. Like he made a lot of improvements to that teaching stream position when he was there, but I don't know when it started exactly.
Yeah.
So I don't have any history on that, but I do know at least a lot of Canadian institutions now do have this. They're called different things at different universities, but ultimately sort of a teaching stream, tenure track, or positions. They seem to be more readily available now. Or maybe I'm just noticing them more.
Well, sure. Yeah. So 7 years now you've been, is this year coming into year
so
8?
July 2013 is when I started. And so I guess it's technically 8 years because now it's August 2021.
Yeah.
So I've been here 8 years now, but it's amazing.
So did you set out for the teaching job, or did you find this teaching job and you're like, I like teaching. I mean, I really like that. And so I think this is the direction of my career. Now, if it had been a research job with some teaching on the side, would that have been your thing?
I think 2 things. I always knew I wanted to teach as part of it. Although I think, in your last year of PhD, you're exploring all different options. I have a lot of friends who went into industry as well, but I do really like to teach. And so I took on a lot of opportunities to teach when I was a graduate student. I think if this position was a teaching and research position, that I wouldn't have been competitive at the time for it.
Interesting.
Right. Because this idea that I think a lot of, from a research stream perspective, a lot of people go into postdocs and then they, build up their CV, get more papers out. And I do find research really fascinating. And I think I'm now at the stage in my career where I can often help and consult on research projects, or I have honors thesis students, and so we work on projects, and that's a lot of fun. But I don't think I would have been competitive. And yeah, of course, looking back at it now, I could say, yeah, teaching stream position is always what I wanted. And I don't know if that's necessarily the case, but I knew that I wanted teaching to be a big part of what I did as a professor.
Yeah. What are you doing these days? Like, what is exciting to you in your career? Well, and you also have like a toddler, so I'm sure like family life is exciting and time demanding and all that. But if there's room and space, what excites you about career right now?
Yeah, and that's something actually I've been thinking a lot about. Like, where do I want my next stages of my career to be? And partly that's because just last year I got promoted to the associate level, so I'm now an associate teaching professor, and I was like, wow. I'm not a junior faculty member anymore. Like, where does that leave me now? Like, what do I want to do? And I don't think I have any clear answers yet, Garth. I think that's sort of been something I've been thinking a lot about, specifically about what courses do I want to teach, and what courses excite me in that I want to make improvements to those courses and make changes or think of ways to change it up a bit or be more innovative. And so I'm not quite sure.
Are you teaching a cross-cultural psychology class?
Yeah, so that's a great question. And that's part of it. It's like, I think a lot of things excite me. I teach primarily in the last few years, I've been teaching intro psych, and I've been teaching 300 level, third junior level statistics. And that's sort of what I've been teaching throughout this whole time. And then started a cultural psychology course. I added that into our books at UVic. And so I've taught that a few times, but I haven't been able to teach it as much as I wanted to because I have all these other courses that demand a lot of my time as well. So I was trying to think about where to focus my energy. Is it statistics? Is it intro psych? Is it cultural psych? In the spring, I am really excited about this course. In the spring, I'm co-teaching a course called the Psychology of Diversity. And I have 2 colleagues who've been co-teaching this the last couple of years. And I've sort of done a bit on the back end, meeting with them and as they formulate their ideas of what this course might be. And so I'm kind of excited to teach that course in the spring. It's for me, it'll be a new prep, which often takes a lot of time and energy. But this course really excites me, and I think I'm really looking forward to this. We're really trying to do a bit more with how can we make large classes feel more collaborative, feel more community oriented. And so we're trying a few things out. So that excites me. It excites me. I'm finally, for the first time, going to the annual conference on teaching in October.
Yes.
This conference has been on my list of conferences to go to probably since 2015 or so. And I've never been, and I'm really excited to be able to hopefully go in October.
Yeah, I hope so.
That excites me.
I mean, yeah, and we have the I think the whole Tip Northwest crew is going, right? I think Rachel and Janet and you and me, and that's the steering committee for Tip Northwest. I think that came up in one of our calls that we were. I mean, most of us.
We're all going. And yes, I'm really excited because I think it's a conference I haven't been to before, and I think one thing that really strikes me, even from that first meeting you for the first time in 2013, is just how amazing the teaching community is, how amazing it is. Everyone just wants to help other people become better teachers, support students better. It's amazing. I remember 2013, I met you, Garth. I met Sue France for the first time, Catherine Ronald at UBC. And it was just like, I was trying to soak up all the advice everyone had for me at the time, just because I knew nothing. And just so astounded by the fact that there's such a beautiful community of teachers who are all really excited and enthusiastic about teaching, and doesn't matter if they haven't met you before, they're willing to share like what they've learned or what they've done before. So
yeah, really it's interesting. I had a former colleague, Ruth Frickel, say to me a couple of years ago, I was talking with her and she saw me as really a, early career junior faculty member. I mean, she was well, she was very senior at Highline College, and I came in. It was my first kind of full-time job. But this a couple of years ago, she said to me, "Well, it sounds like you are firmly now in mid-career." She said to me, and I thought, "No, really? Am I? Yeah, okay, I guess so." But it does change, right? And that's what you're saying is like you're moving into this mid-career point, and now you're aware of this teaching community. You're already giving back to this teaching community in so many ways, right? Through your service to Tip Northwest, other things that you're doing.
Which again is another opportunity. I remember you sort of inviting me like, hey, do you want to be part of the steering committee? I thought, well, that sounds like an awesome thing to do. Right. So,
but this is the role, right? Of mid-careers, you kind of play both the learning and the giving back role at the same time. Yep. So, that's something that, folks like us are kind of continually learning that there is this transition piece of still being a learner, but then also having some expertise along the way. Yeah. Which is a weird.
That's a hope that I can give back some expertise or at least some mentorship. I can think about when I go to teaching demos, like, wow, what interesting novel ways to like learn the material. And I just feel like what I do is I like see what other people are doing. And I think, well, that works for me. Maybe I'll try that out. And hopefully I'll be at some stage at some point to be able to, hey, this is something cool I'm doing in my class that I can give back. I don't think I'm quite there yet. Like I see people like Jessica Hartnett, who's been on psych sessions as well. I remember using her blog in 2013 to get ideas. And just amazing the sort of stuff that people like Jess have done to give back.
Yeah, it is. Hey, Louise, I know that you have a meeting to run to. I really appreciate you taking the time. It's always nice to talk with you. It always has been goodness, we're coming up to 10 years knowing each other now, which is, at the beginning of the conversation, I thought it was 5, but you're right. It is closer to 10. So thanks for all of your help with Tip Northwest, and thanks for taking the time to do this.
Happy to do it.
Yeah. And
happy to chat. It's fun to be able to chat. I know most of our meetings, we have a set amount of time to get some stuff done for Tip Northwest. So in a sense, doing this podcast gives us an opportunity to chat a little bit.
It's so true. It's so true. And we get usually one other time, and that's after Tip Northwest is over. Usually we go out or something for a few hours. So that's the extent
but we didn't get to do that this year with our virtual, right? So looking forward to that trip to Seattle next year.
Well, and Louisville before that. So, Well, hey, Louise, take care. And thanks again for your time, and keep up the good work up there in Canada.
Great. Thanks so much, Garth.